I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor.
Very, very rocky.
Death by government.
Drain the swamp.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of our special edition of Liberty Nation's Swamponomics videocast. I'm your host, Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor. In part 1 of our 2-part interview, Mr. Mark Angelides, the editor-in-chief of Liberty Nation, discusses the upcoming UK election. In part 2, we talk about what happened in elections across the bloc and what this means for Europe. Enjoy. So on the road to the UK election, there were a few pit stops in Europe. So what has happened in Europe in recent days or weeks has dismantled the World Economic Forum agenda and the European Union crusade. Marine Le Pen and the National Rally shocked French President Emmanuel Macron, forcing him to dissolve parliament and call for a snap election. Alternative for Germany is now sitting in second place inside the Bundestag. The right has surged in Austria and Italy and the Netherlands. But while right-wing parties have dominated the narrative, the most interesting development has been the rejection of green policies. So Mark, if more countries are making a right-hand turn, what does this mean for Europe?
Well, it's quite interesting because it depends how you look at it. Of course, everything depends on how you look at it. But there's a big spin machine in motion, especially in America, which is quite fascinating because obviously I read all the American media.
The far right.
The far right, yes. The New York Times, the Grey Lady, it had this rather interesting piece. There's some good insight and analysis into the European Parliament elections. But one line just really struck out to me. And it said, the center of European politics held. And I thought that was fascinating because technically it's true. It's actually center right, but the center managed to maintain their bloc as the largest of the 720 EU parliamentary seats. I think it gained just a small handful as well. And it managed to maintain it. Now, does that mean that the center held? And the answer to that question is no, not in the slightest, because, as you rightly point out, what are termed the far right parties or the more populist parties had huge gains. And that all came at the expense of the left, the Green parties, the more progressive parties that sit in the EU Parliament. So what's happened is it's actually the whole, if you look at it like an Overton window as such, the whole thing moved rightwards. So it's not as though the center held, everything shifted slightly to the right in terms of the balance of power. And from there, we can actually go one level deeper because in the run-up to the elections, the center, as they call it, it was more center-right, actually turned quite swiftly to the right because it was afraid that all these things that you've talked about, the Macron vote collapsing, having to call for another thing, the Prime Minister of Belgium, he's been ousted because of elections on the same day. They're worried that the far right, I am using the quotes there for anybody who's just listening, that they were worried that they were going to take a sizable proportion of the votes, and they did. But the center tacked further right to try and cut that off. So instead of having this very much open borders or liberal immigration policies, these massive Green New Deal, which is essentially what they are, these massive Green New Deal policies, they stopped it themselves. They didn't wait for an opposition to come in. They've stopped them. They've watered them down in a shift to the right to stave off what eventually came to pass.
Now, what I find interesting though is that this is probably a transformation of terms because if you study the platforms of these parties, let's go with Marine Le Pen as an example. Aside from immigration, where she wants to control it, it's hard to see how could she be right of anything. You know, she wants to grow government, she wants to spend more, she wants to give teacher salary increases, she wants to nationalize some part of the economy. It's hard to see how right wing they are. It's just, I guess, if you oppose, immigration restrictions, somehow you're far right. I find that absolutely fascinating. The difference of terms. It's like recession. You know, recession is not 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. A recession is now whatever heck the government deems it to be. Now, one thing I'm curious about is that this seems like 2016 all over again.
Mm.
You know, the fear of the rising tide of right wing parties. You know, you have Donald Trump again in the United States. You have Nigel Farage, you know, making headlines. You wrote about this in your exceptional article by Mark Angelides titled "How the Rise of the European Right Will Impact the 2024 Election." So, what I'm curious about is what's the difference between 2016 and 2024? Those parties who are now making significant gains electorally, they talk about the exact same issues that happened in 2016. Is it a fact that okay, voters realize, oh, they were right, you know, perhaps open borders is not a great policy, or is it that oh, they just hate the machine so much because of the cost of living? What's the shift in voter attitude over the past 8 years?
Okay, I think it's partly that people realized that the propaganda machine that was working against these insurgent ideas, Brexit and Donald Trump, relied on, well, it was called at the time by a lot of polemicists and pundits as Project Fear. And it was taking place across the globe, pretty much everywhere. And what happened was we were told, for example, in the United Kingdom, we were told that the economy would immediately collapse. The sheep would lie down with lions. Frogs would fall from the sky. It was an apocalyptic scenario. And we were also told the same by Hillary Clinton,
Mhm.
that she was saving America from the apocalypse of Donald Trump. And then of course Donald Trump came into power, and well, he managed a reasonable job. I think most conservatives would agree that his policies were fairly middle of the road. They
Mhm.
did some good things that conservatives appreciated. They did some things that even people on the left appreciated. What they didn't like was Donald Trump,
Mhm.
because let's be fair, they saw him as crass and lowbrow. Now, that's the same thing in the United Kingdom, where Brexit was very much a working class, middle class movement, very much so. And then you had Project Fear saying the sky will fall, and it didn't. What actually happened was Britain just sort of carried on,
Mhm.
had a bit
Keep
of a
calm
rocky
and
road,
carry on.
keep calm and carry on. Had a bit of a rocky road, but so did other European nations. And it seems that Britain is actually uh, recovering better from the global downturn than the rest of Europe. And I think that is partly due to being able to write its own terms.
Mhm.
And so what we see now is people aren't falling for the fear factor anymore. Sorry, Joe Rogan, I know that's your thing. The people aren't falling for the fear factor anymore. They've seen that, well, the apocalypse didn't come true with Donald Trump, and the collapse of Britain didn't come true with Brexit. And so these same people who were the faces of it, Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, they're back in the frontline politics. They're back saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then you have the same people on the far left, really, or the left of politics, saying it's going to be an apocalypse, and people don't believe it once it's already been proven not true. And so I think they overplayed their hand the first time round, and to use the same playbook now, it's a bit of a waste of effort and energy on the public. What they should be doing if they want to combat Donald Trump and Nigel Farage is come up with workable solutions that aren't just look at the boogeymen coming back. It's not a good political strategy.
Well, what's funny is that millions of people have endured the financial crisis under these very leftist people at the helm of the ship. They're the ones who,
Mm.
you know, people are dealing with 20% inflation, 40% higher home heating bills. They have war, they're dealing with war in their neighborhood. So, you know, all these things that they're warning about are have come to fruition with them leading the pack. So before I let you go, one last question. With this, you know, right wave that's happening across Europe, is European Union Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen, is she shaking in her boots? Is she worried? You know, what are the EU leaders concerned about? What are they planning?
Well, I think what the European Union body of presidents, because everybody's a president in the European Union, I think what they're really worried about now is, will they be able to move back towards the center left? Although a lot of them have the word conservative in their name, the groups that provide the coalitions, they are very much center to center left in terms of their politics. And I'm thinking, it's just a supposition, but they're worried that they're not going to be able to move back because the more votes that the, as they call them, the far right have picked up, the more speaking time they're going to get, the more presence they're going to have. And are they going to do what Nigel Farage did while he was in the European Parliament, and essentially make politics interesting again in Europe? And if the people on the further right can make politics interesting again in the European Parliament, well, that'll be the death knell for the alleged centre.
So if the European left is demolished, the U.S. left is demolished, all's left now is the Canadian left to be demolished next year, when Pierre Poilievre could eventually annihilate Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. So Mr. Mark Angelides, thank you very much for appearing on Swamponomics TV. It was a delight, and enjoy the next episode of Corey. And that's it for me this week. Please read my full Swamponomics column on the pages of LibertyNation.com, and be sure to check out my previous Swamponomics TV videos and interviews. Thank you. I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor.
Very, very rocky.
Death by government.
Drain the swamp.